The older I get, the less impressed I am by people who brag about how cheaply they live. I have met a great many of them. They drive across town to save a few dollars on something trivial. They spend hours comparing the price of toothpaste, coffee, or laundry soap. They will argue with a waiter over a small charge as if civilization itself depends on the correction. Then, in the very same month, they make a decision that quietly costs them thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, because they were frugal in exactly the wrong place. That is one of the strangest financial habits in the world. People think wealth is built by refusing to spend. It is not. Wealth is built by understanding which dollars are expenses and which dollars are seeds. Those are two very different species of money. A dollar spent on vanity usually dies. A dollar spent on leverage often comes back with relatives. Most people never learn the difference. They become proud of being cheap when they should be proud of being effective. There is a large gulf between thrift and wisdom. Thrift says spend less. Wisdom asks what the money is buying. Thrift sees a price tag and stops there. Wisdom asks what this decision will do to the next 10 years of my life. That second question is where fortunes are usually made or quietly destroyed. I learned some version of this long before I had any right to speak confidently about money. As a boy, I noticed that grown adults were always talking about saving money, but very few of them were talking about return on effort. They would pinch pennies in places that made them feel disciplined, while remaining astonishingly careless in places where a little more spent intelligently would have changed the whole shape of the outcome. That pattern stayed with me, and after decades of investing, buying businesses, watching people succeed, and watching others work hard without getting very far, I have come to a simple conclusion. Being cheap can make you feel responsible. Being wise with money can make you wealthy. Those are not the same achievement. A person can be proudly frugal and still remain trapped for life because he keeps protecting small dollars while sacrificing large ones. Another person may appear to spend more, but if he is spending on the right things, his future keeps getting stronger, while the first fellow is still congratulating himself for cutting corners in all the wrong places. That is why I want to talk plainly about something I think most people misunderstand. There are places in life where saving money is intelligent, and there are places where trying to save money is one of the dumbest financial moves available. The trouble is that the second group often looks responsible in the moment. That is why so many people miss it. A person who buys the cheapest possible version of everything can feel virtuous. He may even be praised for being disciplined. But discipline without judgment is just another way of wandering. I have watched people spend a great deal of time trying to optimize pennies while ignoring the few large decisions that would have actually changed their trajectory. That is like sweeping the floor while the roof leaks. It is still motion, but not the kind that saves the house. The first place I stopped trying to be cheap was knowledge. This surprises some people, because I have a reputation for simplicity. And simple people are often expected to praise free advice, discount shortcuts, and the idea that everything important can be learned casually. I have no quarrel with free information. I have built a great deal of my life on reading annual reports, newspapers, biographies, histories, and other materials that cost very little compared with what they taught me. But the cult of free learning has one enormous blind spot. Free rarely means free. It often means paid for with time, confusion, and delay. Time is the most expensive thing you own, whether you know it yet or not. A young person with limited cash often thinks in dollars because dollars are scarce and visible. An older person, if he has learned anything, starts thinking in years. $1,000 lost can be replaced. A year spent wandering through bad information cannot be recovered. And bad information is plentiful. There are always free videos, free posts, free opinions, free half, educated cousins, free influencers who became confident before they became competent, and free gurus who discovered that certainty sells better than honesty. You can absolutely spend years wandering through that maze. Many people do. The tragedy is that they congratulate themselves for saving money while they are slowly paying with the only asset that really compounds time. I have seen this with language learning, with investing, with business, with tax planning, with writing, with sales, with public speaking, with real estate, with almost every meaningful skill. A person will spend 3 years stitching together random pieces of low-quality information because paying for a serious course, a capable teacher, or a real mentor feels expensive. That is the wrong math. If the right training helps you earn more, decide faster, avoid a big mistake, or compress a learning curve by even a year or two, then the cost of the training was not an expense, it was a bargain. People often balk at spending $500 on a class that could save them 5 years of confusion. Then they happily spend $5,000 on a slightly nicer car because the second choice feels emotionally easier. That is a fascinating form of self-sabotage. The car will not expand their earning power. The course might. The car will not improve their thinking. The right teacher might. The car will depreciate obediently in the driveway. The right knowledge may compound for the rest of their life. That does not mean buying every course sold by every confident face with a sales funnel. Quite the opposite. Good judgment matters more here than in most places. But when the right knowledge source appears, and when the price is modest relative to the speed and quality of the learning, I have no interest in pretending that thrift is noble. The cheapest route is not always the smartest route. Sometimes the so-called cheaper route is merely the slower, messier, and much more expensive route wearing a discount sticker. The world is full of people proud of learning everything the hard way. I would rather learn things the efficient way. Another place where I stopped trying to save every possible dollar is on milestone memories. Now, I want to be careful because foolish people hear a sentence like that and immediately turn it into permission for vanity spending. That is not what I mean. I do not admire extravagance for its own sake. I do not believe every birthday requires fireworks and a band. I do not believe love is measured by catering invoices. And I certainly do not think every family needs to finance its emotions on a credit card. What I mean is something subtler and much more important. There are moments in life that cannot be repeated. A wedding where everyone you care about is still healthy enough to be in one room. A birthday that marks a true crossing in life. A graduation that took years of work to reach. An anniversary where the people who built your life with you are still there to laugh about it. A reunion where multiple generations sit around one table and remember not just what happened, but how it felt. Those moments do not appear every Tuesday. That is why they matter. People have a strange tendency to become most frugal where life is most finite. They will spend thoughtlessly on routine consumption all year and then become aggressively cheap on the very few occasions that might later define what they remember. That is backward. No one sits around at age 75 saying, "Do you remember that miraculous week when I bought the cheaper detergent and saved $6? That is not how memory works. Memory clusters around emotion, rarity, and shared time. The moments we cherish are rarely the ones where we optimize tiny routine costs. They are the ones where presence mattered, where people came together, where something that would never happen in exactly that form again was allowed to happen properly. Again, wisdom matters. This is not a call for theatrical spending. It is a call for proportion. A person can ruin himself by overspending on a wedding or a milestone event, no question. But another person can spend so timidly, so nervously, and so spreadsheet. First, that he squeezes the meaning out of what should have been one of life's few irreplaceable gatherings. That is not wealth either. Money is not a point, it is a tool. And if you have built money carefully, but refuse to use a sensible amount of it to honor the moments that will actually matter in hindsight, then you are not managing wealth. You are worshiping accumulation. Worship is rarely rational. I have seen families carry regret for years, not because they spent too much on a meaningful moment, but because they pinched so hard that the moment felt starved, rushed, or emotionally diminished. And I have seen the reverse. A family spends a little more than their most defensive instinct would prefer, but they do it wisely, deliberately, and on something truly rare. Then 20 years later, the money is long forgotten, and the memory still produces laughter. That is a fine exchange. Money can be replenished. The chance to gather certain people in one room at one exact stage of life often cannot. The third area where being cheap can become extraordinarily expensive is health. I have used one mental image for years because it strips away most of the nonsense. Suppose someone told you that the car in your driveway was the only car you would ever have for the rest of your life. No upgrades, no replacements. No trading in later, no newer model when this one wears out. That would change how most people think immediately. They would maintain it. They would listen to unusual sounds. They would change the oil on time. They would stop pretending that neglect is thrift. They would not brag about skipping every form of maintenance to save a little money in the present. They would understand that the machine must last. The body is an even stricter version of that arrangement. You get one, and yet many people approach it as if replacement parts will eventually become free in consequence. Free, they buy the cheapest food that can still legally be called food. They treat sleep like a hobby for people without ambition. They move as little as possible unless guilt becomes unbearable. They postpone medical care because the bill feels offensive. Then later they discover that a weakened body does not merely create health costs. It weakens everything. Energy falls. Thinking becomes slower. Mood worsens. Work becomes harder. Patience thins. Learning slows. Confidence drops. A person who is underslept, undermoved, inflamed, and chronically exhausted is not merely tired. He is less economically effective. That matters. Health is not just a moral issue, it is an economic engine. The machine that earns, decides, learns, negotiates, builds, invests, and endures. Difficulty is the body and mind you are carrying around. Damage that machine long enough and every other financial plan becomes harder to execute. I am not talking about perfection. Perfection is for magazine covers and fools. I am talking about not being stupid. Good food is not a luxury if it keeps the system operating. Good sleep is not softness. If it sharpens judgment, movement is not a hobby. If it extends useful life and preserves clarity, preventive care is not waste if it catches a larger problem early. A gym membership you actually use may be one of the better bargains you ever make. Proper shoes may save pain that makes movement less likely. A checkup may catch something before it becomes a story that consumes time, money, and peace. People will argue passionately over whether a better quality grocery bill is worth it, then spend years paying the compound interest on neglect. Again, that is bad math wearing the costume of thrift. The human body is an asset producing every dollar you will ever earn, every hour you will ever enjoy, and every decision you will ever make. Why in the world would you try to optimize that asset with the logic of a clearance bin? The fourth place where false thrift becomes expensive is tools. This is one area where beginners often get confused because there is some truth in their instinct. In the beginning, being scrappy is excellent. A person starting from nothing does not need the most luxurious equipment in the world. He needs proof of effort, practice, and usefulness. Simple tools are often wonderful teachers, because they force attention onto skill rather than onto gear. I have no admiration for the person who buys the entire orchestra before learning the first scale. Still, there is a point at which the humble tool stops teaching and starts limiting. That is the point many people miss because the old cheapness has become part of their identity. They become proud of squeezing everything out of inadequate tools, even when the inadequacy is now costing them far more than the upgrade would. A slow computer is not just a computer problem. If your work happens through it, it is a time leak. A terrible microphone is not just a microphone problem. If your business relies on communication, it is a clarity problem. A weak camera, clumsy software, bad desk setup, inferior equipment, poor lighting, a broken chair, a lagging internet connection, all of these can quietly become taxes on output. And when output is the thing that creates money, clients, trust, or growth, those taxes matter. The right tool does not create talent. That is important. A better golf club will not make me Tiger Woods. A better microphone will not make a person eloquent. A better computer will not turn laziness into discipline. But the right tool removes friction. It lets skill translate into output more cleanly. That is a huge advantage. People are often absurdly cheap here. They will fight to avoid spending $1,000 on the thing that could save them an hour a day for years. They see only the invoice. They do not multiply the recovered time. If a better computer saves you an hour a day, that is not a technical upgrade. That is hundreds of hours a year returned to productive life. If your time has any real value at all, the investment pays for itself quickly, and often your time is worth more than you are currently willing to admit. One of the easiest ways to stay small is to force your work through equipment built for a version of your life you have already outgrown. I have seen writers remain slow because they treated proper tools like vanity. I have seen creators produce lower quality because they insisted that enduring weak equipment proved character. I have seen entrepreneurs delay obvious upgrades because they confused frugality with virtue. There is no virtue in keeping the machine weak if the machine is now blocking profitable work. The smart question is never, how little can I spend? The smart question is, what purchase makes my hours, skills, and output more valuable than they are now? Sometimes the answer is a stock. Sometimes the answer is a better chair. This is another area where false thrift flatters people because the benefit is invisible right up until the moment it matters. Insurance is boring. Locks are boring. Proper storage is boring. Legal protection is boring. Backups are boring. A home safe is boring. A security system is boring. All the things that reduce downside without entertaining the ego are boring. That is precisely why people underinvest in them. Human beings have a terrible relationship with low probability consequences. If something has not happened yet, they begin feeling as if it belongs to fiction. Then when it does happen, they behave as though reality betrayed them personally. Reality did no such thing. Reality was always allowed to produce unpleasant surprises. The question was whether you respected that fact in advance. I have always believed that one of the first duties of wealth is protection. What good is years of saving, investing, careful work, and disciplined living if one ugly, unprotected event can erase a shocking amount of it? That is why I never admired the person who bragged about skipping insurance, because he was beating the system. He was not beating the system. He was accepting hidden tail risk for a small visible gain. That is not the same thing. A few hundred or even a few $1,000s a year spent to protect meaningful assets, documents, or structures may look irritating on paper. Good. Plenty of intelligent expenses are slightly irritating. The point is not whether they flatter your mood today. The point is what they prevent. A proper umbrella policy, a safe deposit box, or home safe for irreplaceable documents and valuables. Good health insurance, home protection, cybersecurity for a business, redundant backups. These are all forms of intelligent pessimism, and intelligent pessimism is one of the most underrated traits in personal finance. You do not need to expect disaster every morning. You need only to understand that rare losses are still part of life, and that preventing catastrophic damage is often far more important than squeezing every line item down to the bone. A person who spends decades building wealth while leaving obvious downside gaps exposed is not prudent. He is optimistic in the most dangerous possible way. He is optimistic about low probability pain. I prefer a different style. I would rather accept a small, steady cost than risk a large, chaotic one. That is not fear. That is civilization. The sixth place where cheapness often becomes expensive is professional advice. This one irritates people because it insults a very modern kind of ego. The ego that says, I can probably figure it out myself. Sometimes you can, sometimes you should. I have no interest in hiring a specialist to change a light bulb, but I have lived long enough to know the difference between ordinary self-reliance and foolish overconfidence. There are fields where the details matter so much that casual competence is not good enough. Tax law is one, estate planning is one, legal contract work is one, complex business structure is one, high-stakes financial planning is one. In these areas, a single overlooked clause, rule, exception, filing mistake, or structural error can cost astonishing sums of money relative to the price of good advice. Yet many people try to save money here because the invoice feels insulting. A person will happily lose $10,000 in avoidable tax or contract damage as long as he avoided paying a professional $1,000 up front. That is not thrift. That is vanity. He wanted to preserve the feeling of independence more than he wanted the correct outcome. That is an expensive emotional preference. I have seen people save extraordinary amounts of money because one tax advisor understood one rule the client never would have found in time. I have seen attorneys prevent disasters that looked trivial before the paper was signed and life-changing after. I have seen business owners untangle years of nonsense because they finally paid someone who actually knew what they were doing. That is not weakness. That is staying within your circle of competence. Charlie and I talked about that idea constantly. The smart person is not the one who pretends to understand everything. The smart person knows where his knowledge ends and where somebody else's begins. That border matters. You do not need a consultant for every little decision in life. But when the stakes are real and the subject sits outside your competence, professional advice can be one of the highest return expenditures available. The amateur always feels cheaper at the start. The mistake reveals the true price later. The seventh and perhaps most financially important area where false thrift becomes tragic is retirement investing. Here, the mistake is different. People do not usually become cheap by buying lower quality things. They become cheap with time. They delay, they postpone, they tell themselves there will be a better moment later, a richer moment later, a calmer moment later, a more informed moment later. Later is one of the most expensive words in finance. Compounding is very simple to explain and very hard to respect emotionally. At the beginning it looks weak. The first year feels small. The third year still feels smaller than your imagination wanted. The 10th year begins to show hints of power, and by then many people are either grateful they began or furious that they waited, because the one thing compounding will not negotiate over is time. A dollar invested at 30 is not the same creature as a dollar invested at 45. They may both be dollars. They will not live the same life. The earlier dollar gets decades to work, reinvest, recover, and compound. The later dollar is trying to sprint a race that should have been walked calmly over many years. This is one reason I become impatient when people treat retirement, investing like an optional adult elective. It is not optional if financial independence matters to you at all. Time in the market is not a slogan to me. It is the engine. You do not need to predict every cycle. You do not need to guess every top and bottom. You need to get in and let time do the thing that human beings keep underestimating because it is too quiet in the early years. That is why the person who delays for a decade often has to contribute far more later just to arrive at a similar destination. He did not merely miss returns, he missed years. Years are the real capital. This is also why I am unimpressed by people who spend their early earning years on slightly nicer apartments, slightly nicer vacations, and then tell themselves they will invest seriously later when life settles down. Life rarely settles down on schedule. There is always a new excuse. There is always a new consumption story. There is always a present desire ready to argue its case against an invisible future. That is why systems matter. Automatic investing is one of the greatest behavioral tools ever invented because it removes the need to be wise every month. It decides once and repeats. The future gets paid before the present starts negotiating. That is intelligent. I have seen people with modest incomes become surprisingly strong simply because they began early and continued steadily. And I have seen people with higher incomes remain shockingly weak because they kept giving the best years of compounding away to the present. That is a heartbreaking bargain. When you step back, the pattern underneath all of this becomes very clear. Money is not meant to be protected from every outgoing dollar. That would be a very small life. Money is meant to be directed toward what increases the quality, durability, and optionality of your future. That includes what you know, what you remember, how your body functions, how well you work, how protected you are against downside, how many costly mistakes you avoid, and how much time you allow compounding to work before you need it. The common thread is leverage. Good spending buys leverage. Bad spending buys decoration. Milestone memories buy meaning that outlasts the invoice. Health multiplies every future hour. Tools multiply output. Security preserves the base. Professional advice prevents costly stupidity. Retirement investing buys decades of silent assistance from capital. These are not indulgences, they are force multipliers. And force multipliers deserve respect. The real danger is that many of these categories do not deliver immediate applause. The savings from bad choices are visible. Now, the gains from good choices often reveal themselves later. That is why people keep getting this wrong. They choose the option that makes them feel prudent today and ignore the larger, slower benefit that would have made them truly strong tomorrow. I do not think that is wise. I think it is one of the most common ways ordinary intelligence gets in its own way. A wise financial life is not built by being cheap about everything. It is built by being expensive in the few places that buy back time, preserve capacity, reduce ruin, or expand future earning power. That is a completely different philosophy, and it is why one person can spend a little more and steadily become richer, while another can spend a little less and remain stuck. The difference is not character. The difference is direction. So when someone asks me where they should stop trying to save every last dollar, I do not think first about luxury. I think about return. I think about whether the spending creates leverage. I think about whether the cost is small, relative to the years, earnings, safety, health, memory, or compounding it protects. That is the only honest test I know. If the spending merely flatters your image, be ruthless. If the spending materially improves the machine, the moat, the learning curve, the protection, or the time horizon, stop being proud of cheapness and start being proud of judgment. Cheapness is easy. Judgment is rare. And in the long run, judgment is what gets rich.